What's up, VC? It's Steve again, Harmless Rebel, and it's time for another hard rock and heavy metal update. It seems like forever since I've shown hard rock and heavy metal vinyl, so I've got quite a bit to show. It's only been about a month, but it seems like a lot longer for some reason. But a lot of this stuff I've had a lot longer than a month, so maybe that has something to do with it. But let's just kind of jump in. First up, just a classic. Probably not one of the most popular from this band. I personally like this era of the band, but this is Headless Cross from Black Sabbath. This is a US pressing I got for a really good price. I paid $10 for it because it's warped. It's a slight warp and it plays fine, so ended up being a killer deal. Eventually I want to get one of the vinyl flats, and that'll be one of the first albums that I flatten out. But I mean, every time I see that, it's going for $40, $50, so to find it for $10, I was pretty happy with that. Next up is Rampant from Nazareth. I don't know why I haven't bought this one sooner. I've seen this a number of times. I love Nazareth, especially the earlier Nazareth, and I think this was 70. I'll say this was 75-ish. Let's see, 74. And this is a, I want to say this is a UK pressing. Double check. Pretty sure this is a UK pressing, but it's on the Mooncrest label. Kind of a cool label. I kind of dig that one. But like I said, I see this album all the time, and I don't know why I've never picked it up before. This is actually one of the few Nazareth albums that I was missing. Especially early Nazareth. I mean, like I said, through 75, 76 is definitely my favorite. But honestly, I like pretty much everything that they've released, so. Next up, I grabbed this. I knew it wasn't going to be as good as their prior albums, but I still wanted to check it out, and it's not bad. It's not great. I wouldn't run out in search of a copy, but if you run across it, I would recommend picking it up. This is Dangerous Games from Alcatraz. Of course, this is post Yngwie Malmsteen. They had Danny Johnson on guitars, and it's not a bad album. It's just not near as good as their earlier albums with Yngwie. Next up, this one's a super rare one. I held off on buying this for a while, and finally went ahead and grabbed it. I was hoping the price would go down a little bit. It never did, not surprisingly. This is a band that I've really gotten into over the last few years, though. This is Dominatio Memoria from My Silent Wake. And there were only 100 of these pressed. And this hasn't been pressed on vinyl either, so this is pretty much it. I'm sorry, it hasn't been pressed on CD either. This is pretty much it. The only way to get this initially was through a Kickstarter. I don't remember if it was Kickstarter or Pledge Music. They did like a campaign, and then they still have like 30 left, and Bill Rocks from Rocks Records bought a handful of them, and you can still get them from their Bandcamp site in the UK. But this is a really good album. I'm really glad that I was able to add this to the collection. I'm working on filling out my whole My Silent Wake collection right now. Like I said, I've really gotten into the band over the last few years, and I've just been playing them pretty much nonstop. As a matter of fact, I was just listening to one of their most recent albums. This is Eye of the Needle, and I'll talk about that in the next What's Spinning video that I plan on doing in the next few days here. This one I showed in Lee's contest video, but I left it out and gave it another spin, just because I felt like giving it another spin. But this is Classics Live. And I couldn't figure out why nobody list this as one of their top live albums, because this is a great live album. And then I was talking to Scott about it, Scott Waters, and he mentioned that Joe Perry wasn't in the band for this one. Now he gets credited, but he wasn't playing guitar on this album. So, still, great live album though. Next up is Anvil. If you saw my last, or maybe 2 videos ago, I went and saw Anvil live. I was at one of my local stores and just happened, I never see Anvil anywhere in the wild. And about a week before the concert, I ran across this copy of Forged in the Fire, which I believe it was their second album. I'm pretty sure it was their second album. This is the Canadian pressing on Attic. It's got some ring wear, but the vinyl is super clean, and I got it for a really good price. And it was a week before the show. I was going to actually take this with me to the show and have them sign this and their debut, and then decided at the last minute to just grab one of the new album, because I wanted a nice new album. I didn't want something with ring wear. Both my Anvil, or all 3 of my Anvil albums have ring wear on them. They're all older, and I didn't want one on the wall with ring wear, so I decided to go with the new album. So, still, great album. They actually played, what did they play off of here in that show? They played Forged in Fire. I believe that was it, though, at the show. Next up is a little bit of Virgin Steel. This was their second EP, I think. A Cry in the Night. It's an alright EP. I think they're a little bit overpriced. I paid a little bit too much for this one. But again, it's one of those things I'll probably never see in the wild again. But it's got A Cry in the Night, I'm the One, Go Down Fighting, and then an interview with Mark Snyder. And this one's on Music for Nations. This is a, UK pressing. Next up, this was a real cool find. This was on Hell's Headbangers. This came out in 2012 on Century Media and Flogo Records. And I remember wanting this when it came out and just not running across a copy. But this is the repress of Burning Star, which is Hellstar's debut. If you're not familiar with Hellstar, they're right up there with Metal Church, in my opinion, as one of the better American power metal bands. I believe they were from Dallas. But that whole Texas, San Antonio, Dallas scene put out some killer power metal, just some killer bands. I mean, you had Watchtower come from there too. But this is just a great album. I don't actually like, I prefer the original album cover over this one, but I can see why they got rid of the original. But at the same time, they released a double CD of this. Floga did, Floga Records, and it had the entire album from '84, and then it also had the entire demo album from '83. There wasn't enough room on the album for that, so this has the entire original album, and then it's got the first 2 songs off of the '83 demo on here. So you get the demos for Burning Star and Run with the Pack, and they're okay, but they're not near as good as what was released in '84 as the Burning Star album. So this was a nice pick, and I think I paid like $15 for it from Hell's Headbangers. You may want to go check and see if they still have them. Let's see. Next up, this is a cool find. I almost passed right by this, and something made me stop and take a look. I'm pretty sure I remember somebody showing this in the VC. It may have been Greeno. This is kind of the type of album that he would show. This is a 70s hard rock band, Blue Goose. It's got a embossed album cover. This is really good. Mid-70s hard rock. This is 74, I think, 75 on Anchor Records. And this is actually, it's a corner cut. It's a white label promo. And it's a top loader. So there you go. There's the label for it. But this is just really good hard rock. I'm really digging this album. I've already given it a couple of spins, and I'll spin it a few more times before it ends up on the shelves in the collection. Highly recommend checking this out. If you like 70s hard rock with a Hammond, there's a little synth and Hammond in here, adding some prog elements to it, but just really good 70s hard rock. I really dug this one. Next up, I've shown multiple copies of this. I have the US pressing and the Japanese pressing. Now I have the UK pressing of Hit and Run from Girls School on bronze. This is their second album. I don't remember, somebody was just talking about, maybe it was, I don't remember, somebody was just talking about Girls School. I think it was Nathan was saying that their first two albums are his favorite, and I don't disagree. Their first two albums are my favorite as well. However, I like their entire catalog. I don't think they ever lost the rawness that they had on their first couple albums. It did get more polished over time, but they always maintained elements of that new wave of British heavy metal sound, and they've just always been a really solid band. And actually, a couple years ago, they re-released, or they went into the studio and re-recorded this album. Is like an anniversary album, and they did a really good job. I really dig that album too. And we'll keep it going with the girls. Next, actually, Nathan, speaking of Nathan, he was the one that turned me on to this a few months before it came out. I couldn't wait for it. But this is Hooked on Metal from Acid. This was released by Buried by Time and Dust. And this is, let's see, Hell on Wheels and Hooked on Metal was a 7-inch from '82. That's the first two songs on here. The next three songs are off the Black Card 12-inch, was an EP that they put out, I believe in '82 as well. And then their '82 demo is on the B-side. The A-side is definitely the best, my favorite of this album. The demo is a little bit raw. The sound quality is not great. And a lot of the songs are from the B-side or on the A-side. Hell on Wheels and Hooked on Metal are both just classic songs. Definitely worth checking out. If you haven't checked out Acid, you're really missing out. I've talked about them before. This is one of my all-time favorite bands. I got into these guys really late. I didn't find out about this band until probably the mid to late 90s. When a buddy of mine hooked me up with a CDR. It had to be late 90s because it was a CDR, but he burned a copy of this for me. Not this, but of their first full-length album. It's female-fronted, early power metal. This is probably one of the first power metal albums. Or I'm sorry, power metal, speed metal. One of the first speed metal albums. Kind of a mix of. They kind of sit right in the middle between Venom and Motorhead, and just an amazing band inside the gatefold here, and the fact that it's female fronted just makes it that much better. And they don't have a bad album or a bad song. Their albums are expensive though; they're hard to find. So if you ever run across anything by Acid, grab it. And even this, I think was I think they only did a couple hundred copies of this. They did a couple on, I believe, red vinyl and a couple on black vinyl. This is the black vinyl pressing. And in the same vein, you know, I've mentioned a number of times that I think this band is the modern day embodiment of Acid. This is the new album from Savage Master with Whips and Chains. Another awesome album. I love this album from beginning to end. This is one that I highly recommend picking up. This is on High Roller. It's already getting hard to find, so if you don't have it, find it as soon as, or try to get a copy of it while you still can. It's on, they call it Piss Yellow vinyl, which is hilarious. Again, female fronted band, very much the same vein as Acid. You can hear the inspiration. Same thing. Venom. I hear Venom in there. I hear Motorhead in there. Very traditional band. I'm actually really disappointed. They played here about a month ago, and I was all set go see them. I had actually taken a shower, dressed, I was ready to go, and then a really bad storm came in, and my 6-year-old daughter begged me not to go because she was scared I would get hurt in the storm, you know, and I'm not gonna upset her, so I went ahead and stayed home. And from what I heard, the show was amazing. It was them, and they opened for Holy Grail, and I heard both bands were just awesome. I had a couple of friends that went. They all got their album signed, which would have been cool to get Stacy to sign this. But regardless, if you haven't checked out this band or checked out this album, find it while you can. This next one, couldn't believe this when I ran across this copy. I was in a Goodwill, and as I was flipping through the records, the guy came up and put another stack of records, and I flipped through the first 3 or 4, and it was sound effect albums, not any sought after sound effect albums, just some basic sound effect albums. And then I started flipping through, and I found a couple of real nice albums. The others I'll show in the next miscellaneous vinyl video that I do. But this one was in the very back, and I couldn't grab it fast enough. I was blown away to see this in a Goodwill. But this is Lies from Guns N' Roses. This is the early club edition. It's a Canadian pressing. You can see it's got the uncensored front cover. The later, this one's got the what is it, Wife Beating has been around for 10,000 years. On later pressings, that was replaced with Lies, Lies, Lies. What's weird about it, it's got the uncensored front cover, then it's got the censored inner sleeve, but then where it gets really interesting, I don't even know if I'll be able to show this. It's actually on translucent vinyl. It's like a brown. Let's see if I can show this on the. Can you see that? So if any of you have it, you can really see it. Yeah, it's like a translucent brown vinyl, and I can't find much information about the various pressings. So if any of you have copies of Lies on vinyl, do me a favor and check and see if yours is translucent as well. I don't know if that was a limited thing, if only maybe the Canadian pressing. This was a BMG pressing, I think. Yeah, BMG. I don't know if it was only a BMG pressing thing or if all the pressings were on that translucent vinyl. I mean, it looks black when you look at it. When you put it up to the light, it's like a brown translucent vinyl. So if any of you guys have copies of it, of this album, take a look and put a note down in the comments, because I'm curious to find out. Next up, this is a band I got into when they first came out, and I've been hooked on them ever since. Unfortunately, the style that they helped create has been taken over and is nothing like what it was. But I'm trying to think. Regardless, we've got the new one from Hatebreed, The Concrete Confessional. This is just a great album. What I was saying though, they are what metalcore originally was back in the late, when metal, people don't realize metalcore and thrashcore, those terms have been around since the late 80s, but metalcore back then was more metal sound, or more metal music with a hardcore lyrics. You know, this is basically a hardcore band with playing metal. Jamie Joss is a very hardcore vocal, and his topics are very much hardcore as well. And then Screamo came along. They hijacked the term metalcore and kind of made it their own. It made it into something that it's not even really metal in many ways, but these guys still get associated with it. And I'm starting to see it too with the new Djent thing. If you're familiar with Djent, basically what a bunch of bands have done is they've taken Meshuggah, which have their own avant-garde sound, and and they've taken one of the sounds that they make with their guitar and they copy that sound, and then they've kind of created their own genre called djent that they suck Meshuggah in to try to raise themselves up. None of these bands are anywhere as good as Meshuggah is or have the talent that Meshuggah does, but by associating themselves with this band, they're bringing themselves up. And that's kind of what happened with metalcore, and what modern metalcore eventually ended up taking over the sound. And bands like Hatebreed that really were metalcore, where it was metal and hardcore fused together, have been overshadowed by these bands that really have nothing to do with metal or have anything to do with hardcore. So just my 2 cents. But I got a pre-release pressing of this on clear vinyl. I think there were 100 of each color or 500 of each color. I can't remember. But it's on clear vinyl. And then it also came with a poster. And then what's really cool, a signed CD book signed by the entire band. Again, I'm a huge fan of them. The only thing I don't like about this, I mean, it's cool that they did this, but now I got to go buy the CD to put that into. Which, I mean, honestly, I probably would have bought the CD anyway, because, like I said, I really like Hatebreed. Hatebreed is awesome in the gym. Their name has always been kind of funny to me because it's Hatebreed. But their lyrics have always been about empowerment. Again, very much in line with the hardcore punk scene of the 80s and 90s, or just the hardcore scene in general. But great album, highly recommend that one. Again, another band that they were probably part of the the new metal movement. Them and Korn were probably 2 of the biggest bands in the new metal movement, other than Slipknot, who came along a number of years later. But they've kind of transcended all of those other bands and gone their own direction, and definitely have their own sound. But this is Gore from Deftones. I heard a lot of bad reviews about this album. I actually really like it. They have had a few missteps, in my opinion. Saturday Night Risk comes to mind. And I heard a lot of people talking trash about this album, saying it wasn't that good. They love every Deftones album but this one. I loved it on the first listen. I've given it 3 or 4 spins, and I still really dig it, and I still highly recommend it. So, Gore from the Deftones. And I've seen them live a couple times. Amazing, amazing band to see live. Next up, we'll do that one next. Next up, we've got Universal Juveniles from Max Webster. Max Webster was a Canadian band with Kim Mitchell on guitar and vocals. His solo albums did a little bit better than the Max Webster stuff did here in the U.S. This one was the only real hit that I know of here in the U.S. And the main reason this was a hit was because of the song on here. I think it's Battle Scar that Rush was on. Is it Battle Scar? It doesn't even say, does it? I'm pretty sure it was Battle Scar that featured Rush. Regardless, the song on here that had Rush on it, it's a great, and it is the best song on the album in my opinion. That being said, the whole album is good. But every time I see this, it's trashed. And I finally found a copy. I'm not going to be able to get this copy. The cover is not in the best shape, but the vinyl itself is mint and sounds beautiful. So next up, we have Uriah Heep, The Magician's Birthday. Somehow I missed this one. I've never owned a copy of this. I thought that I had this in my collection, but I didn't. And then when I listened to it, they're not songs that I knew. So it's really nice to add this to the collection. I think this album's great. I've given it a couple spins. Actually, I think the title track is the weakest track on here. It's also the longest. I think it's like 10 minutes, 10 and a half minutes. But I'm just not a fan of that song, but I love everything else on this album and would definitely pick this one up if you find a copy. And then last but not least, and we'll talk about this first. This is the debut from Extreme. If all you know from Extreme is Porno Graffiti, I highly recommend checking out this album and their third album. This first album is probably my favorite. Scott and I got in a really good discussion about this a couple nights ago. He thinks that the third album is their best and this is their second best. I think vice versa, but they're both killer albums. But I picked up this nice promo copy. It's in mint condition. If you're not familiar with Rush, with Extreme, they have their own sound. They mix. There's elements of sleaze. There's elements of glam. There's elements of funk. Nuno Bettencourt, the guitarist, is one of the best guitarists in hard rock and heavy metal. He doesn't get a lot of credit for it. You never see him pop up on the list of the best guitarists, but he's in there. And he was very much into funk guitar and very much into Queen. It's one of his favorite bands, and you hear all of that in their music. But it's still just really good 80s hard rock. Highly recommend checking them out. But it definitely has that punk infusion. So, last but not least, let's talk about what we're listening to. I can't get enough of this album. I had never heard of this band before or heard this album. It actually sat here on my desk for probably a year before I got around to opening it. This was a freebie that I got from Hell's Headbangers. It's a band called Ritual, and the album is called Widow. What I didn't know was that this is a really highly sought after new wave of British heavy metal album. Let me show you the original album cover. This came out in '83 and originally. That's the original album cover. This is the one that it came with. So the band is Ritual. For years, people thought the band was called Widow. And what had happened was they pressed 2,000 copies of their album. This is the only thing that they released. There may have been an EP too, but this was their only full length. And the first 1,500 were mispressed, and Ritual, the name of the band, didn't show up. So all it said was Widow. And for years, people thought that they were called Widow. And then the last 500, they finally fixed it, and the last 500 had Ritual on them. And because of that, those first 1,500 press, which is a real low number anyway, those go for well into the $1,000 range. And the very rare 500 with actual Ritual's name on there, I just saw one that had sold for like $2,100. So I'll never get copies of those. It's just not going to happen. I'm not going to spend that much on a record. I would love to have this on vinyl. And in 2008, when Shadow Kingdom did this, High Roller also did a limited pressing of their vinyl. I think it was 150 on blue vinyl and 150 on black. But even those, the blue vinyl goes for 60, 70 bucks. And the black vinyl's in the $40 range. So even that's getting pretty pricey. But this is a killer album. I highly recommend checking this one out. They call it a mix of new wave of traditional heavy metal, or new wave of British heavy metal and doom metal. To me, it's straight up new wave of British heavy metal, but with Danzig vocals. You can't hear it so much on this album, or I'm sorry, on this song, but like the prior song, the singer sounds just like Glenn Danzig, and you can kind of hear it here, but not as much. But on the two previous songs, he sounds just like Glenn Danzig, and it's a really cool sound. And the album it's awesome. Again, I would go to Shadow Kingdom or Hell's High Rollers. If they've got copies of this, grab it. It's an amazing, amazing album, and one that I highly recommend. So that's it, VC. The video's already gone longer than I expected it to. I've got a lot more to show. I've got, here, let me just show you the stack of CDs, most of which hasn't been listened to. And then I've got down here all of these bins here, these 2 bins of stuff that I haven't listened to, those piles there. All of that has been listened to but hasn't been in the video, or I'm sorry, see if I can, yeah, all of that right there. And I'm going to be doing I'll be doing a new room tour in the next month or so too, because there's been a lot of changes to my stereo system. We're putting some new shelving and stuff in here, so I'll be showing off some of that stuff too. So a lot of stuff coming. Plus I've got 1, 2, I think I've got 4 more box sets, maybe 5 more box sets that I haven't done videos for. So a lot of stuff coming. Keep your eye out. That's pretty much it, VC. Take care. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you soon.